Thank you for watching this video. My name is John Paul Vargheese. I'm a research fellow in computing science at the University of Aberdeen, and this presentation is a summary of our work exploring susceptibility measures to persuasion for the Persuasive 2020 conference. So to begin with, I'm going to give a very brief summary of this work before going into some details about the background and motivation. I will then go over the methodology and results before discussing some of the limitations of this research. And finally, I will end with a summary of the main findings and briefly cover some ideas for future work in this area. Persuasive technologies and behavioural change interventions typically apply persuasive strategies, which are very often based on Cialdini's principles of persuasion. Now, not all persuasive strategies are equally effective, and this variation in effectiveness can be due to individual differences such as age and gender, as well as a wide range of other potential factors. Recently, Cialdini defined the seventh principle, unity, which has some underlying similarities to the previously defined principle of social proof. So the main question we are asking in this work is how can we measure susceptibility to all Cialdini principles to better identify which persuasive strategies are likely to be the most effective. So we conducted an experiment with a view to validating and extending the susceptibility to persuasion scale, and this experiment consisted of two stages. In the first stage, we gathered susceptibility measures to all 7 Cialdini principles, and in the second stage, we applied persuasive strategies based on these principles and compared the behavioural outcomes to susceptibility measures gathered in the first stage of the experiment. The results we present in our paper are susceptibility measures to unity, social proof, together with commitment, scarcity, and reciprocity, and subsequent analysis indicates that these have acceptable to good internal consistency. So I'll now go into some more details about the background and motivation for this work. As I mentioned, persuasive technologies typically apply persuasive strategies which are very often based on Cialdini's principles of persuasion. Cialdini defines 7 principles of persuasion, and these are based on an extensive volume of research that demonstrates their effectiveness. I will now briefly summarize each of these principles. Starting with reciprocity, we are likely to respond in kind as the receiving party in an exchange have a sense of obligation to do so. For example, in consumer practice, offering a free trial or sample has been demonstrated to be a very effective means for increasing sales and encouraging individuals to purchase products. The principle of scarcity refers to how individuals are strongly motivated to avoid loss, and this can be used to encourage a particular course of action. Another consumer example is stating the limited availability of a product or stating that a discount is available for a limited time only. Both approaches rely on scarcity to encourage consumers to make a purchase to avoid a potential loss. The principle of authority refers to how we are inclined to accept the beliefs and attitudes of those we consider to be within a position of expertise and/or authority. For example, goods and services stated as the preferred choice of an individual acknowledged as a domain expert and therefore in a position of authority for a given topic can strongly influence decision-making and behavior. Commitment refers to how we seek consistency to avoid complexity resulting from inconsistencies with our beliefs and behavior. This can be used to influence our behavior through the use of a reminder that indicates what steps or progress we have already performed in relation to a wider course of action. These reminders may be found in fitness applications that display our current progress, serving as a reminder designed to encourage us to keep going towards our goal. Liking refers to how we can be influenced by what we consider to be attractive and appealing to us. If we know in advance what is attractive and appealing to an individual, then we can leverage this to influence behavior by associating what is known to be liked with a particular course of action. Another consumer example here is celebrity endorsements. Social proof refers to how our behavior and beliefs may be strongly influenced by what we observe in others as correct and/or appropriate. So in this example, let's say we want to persuade an individual to move towards the right. Assuming they are susceptible to social proof, we can persuade them to move in the direction we want them to by pointing out that others are also moving in this direction, and as such, this is the correct way to go. Finally, the most recently defined principle, unity, refers to how our behaviour can be influenced by reference to shared identities or groups we consider ourselves to be a member of. Cialdini refers to the concepts of acting together and being together and how these can be leveraged to influence our behaviour. So in this example, let's assume we want to encourage either an individual within the blue or red group to move in a certain direction. Assuming they are susceptible to unity and consider themselves a member of either group, we can achieve our goal by stating the direction where other members of the same group are heading towards. So there are underlying similarities between social proof and unity with regards to how our behaviour may be influenced by observing the actions of others. The distinction lies with how unity refers to the shared identities or groups that the target of persuasion consider themselves to be a member of. However, given the underlying reference to the behaviour of others, there is a potential overlap of what factors may influence behaviour. There is a large volume of research that shows that not all persuasive strategies are equally effective, and this can be due to individual differences and a wide range of other potential factors. This means personalizing persuasive strategies by knowing which are most likely to be effective is desirable, but how can we go about doing this? One approach is to use the Susceptibility to Persuasion scale, which has been designed to measure perceived susceptibility to persuasive strategies based on the original 6 Cialdini principles. The scale consists of 26 questions with a 7-point Likert scale and was developed and validated using a longitudinal study of actual effectiveness related to dietary habits. This scale has been widely used to develop personalized persuasive strategies across a broad range of domains and in other studies investigating susceptibility to persuasion. Our research is guided by the following research questions. How can we measure susceptibility to both unity and social proof? What other Cialdini principles can we measure together with unity and social proof? And what is the impact of individual differences on susceptibility and behaviour? To address our research questions, we conducted an online survey with participants recruited from Amazon Mechanical Turk. In total, 320 participants took part, with 302 passing attention check questions. All participants were required to have a 95% acceptance rating, and participants were restricted to being based in either Canada, the USA, or United Kingdom. Participants were first presented with an information sheet that provides an overview of the experiment, including what questions would be asked, how data would be captured and used, and details about the funding of our research project. Secondly, a consent form is presented for participants to agree whether or not they wish to proceed and take part with the experiment. Thirdly, demographic questions are presented where participants indicate their gender, age, and location. To extend the susceptibility to persuasion scale, we included an additional 10 items to the original 32 used to develop the scale. The additional items were specifically designed to assess to what extent membership of social groups could be leveraged to influence behavior. We tried to include scenarios that would include potential overlap between social proof and unity. A further 4 attention check questions were included, and in total there were 46 questions randomly displayed with a 7-point Likert scale to capture participant responses. Here is a sample of some of the unity susceptibility questions we used. The full set of unity questions are available in our paper. Each question aims to assess the value participants may hold with respect to some abstract examples of social groups they may potentially consider themselves to be a member of. Our expectation was that this would provide us with an indication to how these shared identities could be leveraged to influence behavior. All 46 questions were randomly displayed in 11 sets of 4 and 1 set of 2. After completing the susceptibility questions, participants were provided with the opportunity to give us feedback on their experience with the survey. Following this, participants were presented with one of 7 persuasive strategies based on one of the 7 Cialdini principles, and the goal of each strategy was to encourage participants to take part in an optional personality survey. If participants agreed, they were presented with the 10-item personality inventory test. Upon completing the personality test, or in the event they chose not to, participants were presented with a thank you notice. The majority of participants were based in the USA and within the 30 to 39-year-old age band, and there were more female than male participants. These graphs are just to give you an indication of the distribution of persuasive strategies applied. In addition, you can see that a greater number of participants completed the personality survey compared to those who did not. To discover whether we could measure susceptibility to unity in addition to other Cialdini principles, we used principal component analysis. The analysis was performed using a polychoric correlation matrix to account for the fact that participant responses were captured using an ordinal scale. Our basic assumption tests indicate that all 42 questions correlated with others with at least 0.3. The Kaiser-Meyer-Olkin or KMO test of sampling adequacy was in the marvelous category, and Bartlett's test of sphericity was significant. And finally, all communalities were above 0.3. Following our assumption tests, we first used parallel analysis to discover how many components to extract. Very briefly, this will compare eigenvalues of the correlation matrix to those generated from a Monte Carlo simulation of random data of the same size. Results of this analysis suggested 4 components to retain. We also ran Valesia's minimum average or MAP test as an alternative to parallel analysis. However, both 4 and 5 component solutions recommended by these tests were deemed overly complex and as such difficult to interpret due to multiple high and low cross-loadings. Interpreting the scree plot was inconclusive due to the potential for multiple points of inflection. This led to a need for us to establish a criteria for how many components to extract based on recommendations from the literature. For more details about this, please see the results section of our paper. So this is the component extraction criteria we used based on recommendations from the literature. Moving from the top center to the right, first we assume there are 7 underlying components given previous work which has used the susceptibility to persuasion scale and reported positive results. Secondly, moving from the top to the middle right, components would only be considered for extraction provided they meet the latent root criteria of eigenvalues greater than or equal to 1. This is suitable provided the sample size is greater than 250 and the average communality of the questions is greater than or equal to 0.6. Moving down to the bottom. Thirdly, only stable components are retained, that is, components with a minimum of 3 strong loadings of at least 0.5, as these may be considered practically significant. Finally, a component solution would only be considered suitable provided it has an optimal structure, that is, responses from questions loading highly onto a single component only that is conceptually related. In practice, this is the process we followed. We first inspected a 7-component unrotated solution before applying Oberlin rotation to improve interpretation. We then apply our criteria, checking that all conditions are fulfilled. Where a component does not meet the latent root criteria, it is removed together with all items related to that component. Next, we recalculate the correlation matrix and check whether the remaining components meet the latent root criteria. In the event this condition is satisfied, we remove any high and low cross-loadings individually and repeat the process. Following this process, we discovered a 5-component solution that accounted for 65% of the variance. This solution included a subset of susceptibility measures for unity, commitment, social proof, reciprocity, and scarcity. We were unable to obtain stable components for the principles of authority and liking. We performed a reliability analysis using ordinal alpha based on a correlation matrix of responses to the 5 components extracted. Results indicate good internal consistency for unity, commitment, and social proof, and acceptable for scarcity. We investigated the effectiveness of all 7 persuasive strategies applied during the experiment. We did this to discover whether there was an overall significant difference in their effectiveness. While this is true, we didn't observe any significant differences based on participants' gender or age. Checking how susceptibility scores corresponded with behavior, we calculated composite susceptibility scores based on the median of participant responses for our 5-component solution. There was no significant difference with regards to these scores and the effectiveness of the strategies, and I will talk more about this later when we go over the limitations of this work. We did discover that participants with greater scores for unity, scarcity, and social proof were more likely to be persuaded to complete the personality test, but this was irrespective of what persuasive strategy was applied. In terms of variation in susceptibility scores, male participants reported greater susceptibility to social proof only compared to female participants. There were no significant differences in susceptibility scores based on participants' age. I will now discuss some of the limitations of this work. With regards to the questions concerning susceptibility to unity, there are more of these compared to other questions related to other Cialdini principles. We accepted this trade-off as we sought to include potential overlap between social proof and unity, in addition to measuring susceptibility to both, respectively. Our analysis and criteria used is intended to remove as many redundant questions as possible, but there are possibly some practical disadvantages to the disproportionate number of questions for unity compared to other principles. Secondly, while we assume participants completed the personality survey in response to a persuasive strategy presented, this is not guaranteed, and there could be additional factors outside our study design that influence participants' decision to do so. With regards to the behavioural analysis in relation to susceptibility scores, our results are highly constrained by low numbers of participants who received each persuasive strategy and chose to complete the personality survey. In summary, in this work we investigated how we can measure susceptibility to persuasive strategies based on Cialdini's principles, including the latest defined principle, unity. Building on previous work in this area using the susceptibility to persuasion scale, we presented in our paper 5 measures of susceptibility to unity, social proof, commitment, scarcity, and reciprocity, and these have acceptable to good internal consistency. We also present some limited findings with regards to individual differences and reported susceptibility scores. In future work, we aim to further evaluate our 5-component solution using an alternative behavioural outcome measure. Using an optional survey as a behavioural outcome measure does provide a means for demonstrating the actual effectiveness of persuasive strategies. However, there are limitations which could be overcome if we consider using a more real-world behavioural outcome measure. In relation to this, we wish to model scenarios presented in each of the susceptibility questions using behaviour change models available in the literature. These could be the Persuasive Systems Design Model, Fogg Behavioural Model, and Behaviour Change Wheel. We anticipate this could help us refine our susceptibility questions by more accurately defining the underlying processes by which we seek to understand how participants may be susceptible to different persuasive strategies. This could also help towards developing questions designed to assess susceptibility to persuasive strategies based on combination of Cialdini principles. We also intend to extend our 5-component solution to incorporate the principles of liking and authority. This research was funded by the EPSRC grant supporting security policy with effective digital intervention. You can find out more about our project on the project website listed here. I would like to thank my co-authors and reviewers for their suggestions on how to improve this work. I would also like to thank the Programme Committee for all their hard work making this year's conference go ahead given the current circumstances. Thank you for watching, and please get in touch if you have any questions.